Thomas Jefferson and Mr. Alexander Hamilton.
It is a great pleasure to see all of you here this evening, people who are anxious for the future of your country. We, of course, come from a different time. Political life was different in our day. When I began working with General Washington, there was but a single faction or party called the Federalist faction. Opposition developed almost immediately to many of the plans and proposals of General Washington's cabinet. Mr. Jefferson ended up being the de facto head of that particular opposition, and hopefully tonight we will give you our different views of what our America looks like. I would like to begin with these words. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish the United States of America. This, of course, is the preamble of the Constitution of the United States, a document which guides you to this day. I was a part not only of the Constitutional Convention, but also of the movement to have a new Constitution. We were floundering under the Articles of Confederation. I was a late member of the Continental Congress, and I fell in with a Virginian named Mr. James Madison. And the two of us contrived to have a meeting among the states concerning the Commerce Clause of the Articles of Confederation, and that led to the calling of a constitutional convention, which of course happened in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 and led to ratification by all the states of the United States, with one exception. That Constitution began a new era in American political life. General Washington, of course, was elected president. He had a cabinet which must have been one of the most able in human history. Secretary of State, Mr. Jefferson. Secretary of the Treasury, me. Edmund Randolph, General Knox. It was a talented group of human beings. But early on it became apparent that we had differing views of what the Constitution called for the country to do and how what was done would take shape. I would briefly, and we have allotted each other approximately 10 minutes, I would briefly like to tell you what my vision of the United States of America was in that early day. I thought we needed to be a nation in which liberty was secured. But I knew that liberty could not exist without the promotion and providing for the national defense. So I believed a free America needed to be a strong America with an army and a navy. I believed that America needed to be a prosperous nation, a nation in which not only were farmers celebrated and their products of the earth, but also merchants who provided a great deal by way of their particular traffic, and also manufacturing. And I must say my encouraging of manufacturing grew out as much as anything from my time in the Revolutionary Army. A nation that cannot provide its own armaments is at the mercy of foreign powers. A nation that cannot equip its own troops and sustain them in the field is at the mercy of others. I spent that long winter at Valley Forge, literally watching our soldiers bleed and die. And in my mind, I said, never again. Never again and as Secretary of the Treasury, I urged General Washington, who of course agreed with me, to make all provisions possible for the establishment of a regular Army and a Navy. I believe a Hamiltonian nation is not only prosperous, involving all manner of people in agriculture, in mercantile arts, and in manufacturing, but it is also a nation in which people have the opportunity to succeed. And I can think of no one in my time who traveled a further distance to success than did I. Born in obscurity on the island of Nevis, raised on the island of St. Croix, my father left our family. My mother died when I was 11. The relative who was given charge of us was gone at 12. And I was cast upon my own resources from that early age. I believed that there was greatness within me, and I struggled to bring it out. I worked hard, and on this small island was noticed for the prodigiousness of my intelligence and for the abilities that I demonstrated through work. I was a merchant clerk, and I became so good at being a merchant clerk that my employer, when he grew ill, went back to New York and left me in charge of the business at the age of 14. I was noticed, and eventually it was suggested that I be sent to the colonies for an education. Of course, that came on the eve of the Revolution. I got embroiled, of course, in the revolutionary cause early on. I have been castigated through the years as an elitist, as a man who believes only in high-tone, high-born people. But of course, my affiliation at the beginning of the revolution was with mechanics and artisans, with ordinary people, the sort that you would call blue-collar people. I worked hard, and I succeeded. And I proved that America could be a place where anyone, if he or she worked hard enough, could find their way and become prosperous. So for me, a prosperous nation that provided opportunity for everyone, a strong nation, a nation committed to liberty, but liberty at the understanding that it has to be secured with armed force, that we could no longer be at the mercies of European powers that wanted to toy with us at will. This would be a Hamilton nation. And yes, there was one thing more. I believed we needed to be a moral nation. We needed to be a nation of people who understood that religion and morality are the props always of civil virtue. That would be a Hamiltonian nation. And I offer that tonight as the beginning of this encounter with Mr. Jefferson, so that you will perhaps for the first time understand that what I favored was not unlike the country that I sensed could one day become a Hercules among nations, but at the time in which I was the Secretary of the Treasury, was in such deep financial chaos that no one would loan the United States any money. You have come a long way, and it is a bequest that was given to you by those of us who gathered in Philadelphia and who knew that we needed a more perfect union. Thank you.
My dear citizens, thank you so much for inviting me back to Norfolk. I was here in November of 1789 when my daughters and I came back from my 5-year residency in France. I had gone in 1784 from Boston, but on the return journey in November of 1789, we disembarked at Norfolk, and I made my way back towards my beloved Monticello, but lingering along the way at friends' houses and plantations. But when I arrived on the shore here, I had expected to take care of some pressing business at Monticello and see my daughters safely return to American life. And then I would go back to France to see the revolution through. This was the midst of the Great French Revolution. I was deeply curious about it. I wanted to see, and I hoped that it would end in the establishment of a free French Republic. And so my desire was to go back and resume my post as the American minister to the court of Louis XVI. But when I arrived on shore, there was a letter waiting for me. It was from the new President of the United States, George Washington, saying that he had appointed me to be the first Secretary of State and that he had submitted my name to the Senate, and the Senate had approved that appointment. And yet this was the first that I had ever heard of it. All of my belongings were in Paris, and I dearly wanted to return, but one does not say no to President Washington. And so I wrapped up my affairs in Virginia and made my way to the first national capital in New York, and it is there, in fact, that I met Alexander Hamilton for the first time. So thank you for having me here tonight. Let me say some things of praise to Mr. Hamilton. First of all, he was a man who distinguished himself during the war, particularly at Yorktown, the climactic battle of the war. Secondly, he was all of his life a principled abolitionist. He was an early and dedicated member of the New York Manumission Society and did positive things in the state of New York to bring about conditions of emancipation and greater tolerance for freed Negroes in that state. In a letter that I wrote to John Adams in about 1816, I said that there were two types of aristocrats in the world. There are pseudo-aristocrats, people born into wealth and privilege, and then there are natural aristocrats. There are people of merit, of creativity, of industriousness, of wisdom, people with extraordinary intelligence and capacity to contribute to their community. And I said the pseudo-aristocrats, and I was one of them, a person born into wealth and privilege, are not to be overly encouraged in a republic. It's the natural aristocrats that we should find out wherever they're born, and they're as often born in hovels as they are in great palaces. And the great society is the one that lifts these natural aristocrats from positions of some degradation in the economy so that they can become leaders in the arts, in science, in philosophy, in statesmanship. I said, even if the culture doesn't find ways to promote meritocracy, we must ensure that it never gives its weight to the pseudo-aristocrats, that it never gives deeper legitimacy and financial favors and political power to people who are already born into wealth and privilege. So Adams and I discussed this question in a number of the letters that we exchanged during this period. But let me say this. If there were ever a natural aristocrat, it's Alexander Hamilton. Born, as he said, in obscurity in the Caribbean. Came to this country as a young man, sponsored by people who saw his merits. Went to King's College, Columbia, in New York, distinguished himself there, then became the aide-de-camp to General Washington. Fought bravely in the Revolutionary War, and then became America's first Secretary of the Treasury. And even though, and I don't mean this with any disrespect, I disagree with almost everything he did as the Secretary of the Treasury, he was a man of extraordinary capacity, a genius of a certain sort. And so I say this with deep respect. When the Jay Treaty was being discussed in the United States in 1795, this was a treaty by John Jay of New York. He'd gone off to England to try to sort out some lingering questions that were left over after the settlement that came after the Revolution. And Jay's treaty was highly unpopular, particularly here in Virginia. But Hamilton wrote a series of essays for the newspapers in New York that were so effective that I wrote to my closest friend, James Madison, and said, he's a host unto himself. He's a colossus of the anti-Republican forces in this country. And so whether I disagreed with Alexander Hamilton or not about visions of this nation, I will give to him praise as a man of extraordinary ability. And I should say, in a certain sense, he made me the President of the United States. This is a really sort of remarkable story, and I hope when you speak next, you will clear some of this up. But there are three ways in which he made me the President of the United States. First, there was something called the Quasi-War in 1798, an undeclared naval war against France. France, in the age of the Revolution, had waged war against almost all the European powers. Britain and France were now locked in a world war of national survival, and both of them were damaging American interests at sea, but in this case, particularly France. And so in the Adams administration, we didn't declare war against France, but we fought this undeclared naval action for a couple of years. And Mr. Hamilton, and if I'm wrong about any of these details, I know you will tell me, but he, with George Washington, demanded an army to repel a French invasion of 50,000 strong. Well, nothing like that had ever been seen here. And eventually Congress, in its good sense, whittled that down to a provisional army of 10,000. It never saw action. But Mr. Hamilton insisted that he be named the Inspector General, the second in command of that army, and got his protector, George Washington, to make that a demand that President Adams could not afford to deny. And so in a certain sense, his patronage from George Washington enabled Mr. Hamilton suddenly to become the principal military officer of this country. But Adams was not in favor of a war, and impulsively he sent a second diplomatic mission to France in 1799, and in doing so, resolved the differences we had with France and ended this struggle, this Cold War. This offended the High Federalists, including Mr. Hamilton. And at that point, and I hope I'm quoting you accurately, sir, Mr. Hamilton suggested that because of the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions that we had passed here, remonstrating against high-handed tactics during the Adams administration, that it would be convenient to march that provisional army through Virginia and Kentucky to intimidate the rebels of the Upper South. And he even said, I'm squinting at South America. He wanted to take a filibustering mission all the way to Peru and Venezuela to use his provisional army because he could hardly contemplate building an army and then not fighting someone with it. This was unpopular. And because of that unpopularity, and because of the Alien and Sedition laws of 1798, the election turned, and after 12 years of Federalist rule, Washington, Adams, but behind the scenes, Alexander Hamilton, the country in 1800, in what I called the Second American Revolution, retired these gentlemen from public life and put myself in as president, after me, James Madison, after both of us, James Monroe, 24 years of what's known as the Virginia dynasty. And so that Second American Revolution was, in some sense, precipitated by the high-handedness of that provisional army. The second thing is even more remarkable, and that is that when President Adams began to shut down that army, he was never someone who admired Alexander Hamilton. He was rude to Hamilton. And they had a famous confrontation in the president's office. And afterwards, Mr. Hamilton, who was a man of a very strong sense of personal honor, was so outraged by Adams that he went away and he wrote a 54-page pamphlet in October of 1800, just weeks before the election, attacking John Adams, the sitting Federalist incumbent of his own party, attacking Adams as a man wholly unfit for the presidency. 54 pages. Even his closest friends thought that this was the most insane and self-destructive thing that Alexander Hamilton had ever done. It effectively cost John Adams re-election in 1800. It ended once and for all Mr. Hamilton's political aspirations, and it hastened the death of the Federalist Party. By 1808, when I retired from the presidency, the Federalist Party was a nullity. It had disappeared from American life after being the party that created this country in 1787. That doesn't all owe to this impulsive pamphlet, but a great deal does. And it gets just one step worse. After every one of Mr. Hamilton's friends said, "Why did you do this thing? This was the most self-destructive thing that could ever have been done for the Federalist Party," Mr. Hamilton wanted to do a second edition with more anecdotes about Adams. He was collecting more material for an expanded second edition of the pamphlet. And then finally, as you may know, that in 1800 we were not yet differentiating the ticketing for president and vice president. So whoever got the most number of votes in the Electoral College became president. The person who got the second most number of electoral votes became vice president. Thus, in 1796, Adams had been elected president. He was a Federalist. I got the second most number of votes. I was therefore vice president, even though Adams and I didn't agree about much. We weren't of the same party. We weren't on the same ticket, but that's how the system worked. In 1800, everyone in the country knew that I was the presidential candidate of the Republicans, and everyone in the country, there were about 6 million of us, knew that Adams was the incumbent candidate of the Federalists, Adams v. Jefferson, and that my vice president would be Aaron Burr of New York. When the electoral results were read in early December of 1800, it turns out that I had defeated John Adams, 73 votes to 65. He was now retired to Massachusetts. But I had tied with Colonel Burr. We each had 73 votes. Now, there wasn't a single American who didn't know that I was president and Burr vice president, but the Constitution didn't know that because the Constitution saw a tie. When this happens, the election is thrown into the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives that was to sit in judgment of this was an outgoing, discredited, Federalist, lame duck House of Representatives. And they despised me. They regard me as a dangerous Jacobin, a man Frenchified in his manners, a man who was given to flights of philosophic fantasy. One of the Federalists said Mr. Jefferson would be an outstanding president of a university, but not the president of a republic. They did not want me to be president. And so these lame duck Federalists actually flirted with Colonel Burr and said that if he would cooperate with them, they would put him in the presidential chair in my place. If this had happened, it might have produced civil war. But here's the interesting thing. Mr. Hamilton didn't like me. He regarded me as a very dangerous man. He can tell you what he wrote in several letters of this period about my character and my philosophy and my manners and so on. But he disliked Aaron Burr even more. And he wrote indefatigably and talked to anybody he could, especially amongst the moderate Federalists, to say, Jefferson is dangerous, but Burr is a disaster. In short, he said Jefferson, for all of his problems, is a man of character and the lesser of two evils. And that turned the election. Eventually, the moderate Federalists said, However much we dislike Jefferson, he was elected, and if Hamilton says Jefferson should be put in that office and Burr is not to be trusted by any rational human being, then we will reluctantly install Jefferson as the third president of the United States. So, sir, I thank you.
Particulars of what Mr. Jefferson was saying were true. Aspects of what he said were not true.
Which parts? I would like to know if I were in error, because I was really trying to be very fair.
Sir, I'm trying to be gentlemanly up here. I did not interrupt you.
I'm actually asking you to clarify the errors that I have made.
I'm having deja vu all over again, although the roles are reversed.
And you have been watching the great debate. It's Thomas Jefferson versus Alexander Hamilton. This is the rematch, folks. This is a program we did live here in Norfolk at the Roper Theater just a few months ago, and now we're bringing it to you for the first time on our air. And I'm so thrilled to have Alexander Hamilton with me tonight. It's great to have Bill Crystal here. Bill, thanks for being here.
It is my pleasure, Bert. I love WHRO.
Well, and we love the relationship we have with you. Let's talk to the viewers a little bit about what they've just seen.
It's a pretty remarkable introduction. Hamilton, of course, came out and stated what his view of America is. It should resonate with, even though I know Jefferson has a lot of fans here in the Tidewater, Hamilton's view really ought to resonate with many people who live here. He thought a strong military was essential, and of course the military is the bread and butter of this part of the world. Right. He also thought America should be a Hercules among nations, a nation that could defend itself from every possible threat in any place. He had an understanding of America that was probably 50 years ahead of what most of his contemporaries saw, including Thomas Jefferson. I think Jefferson, of course, comes out and does a wonderful job when he rises to talk about Alexander Hamilton's strengths, but you've got to watch being praised by your enemies. That's a very dangerous place to find yourself. And of course, that's exactly what happens. So I think then, of course, Mr. Jefferson does a wonderful job of beginning to point out the differences between himself and General Hamilton. And there are huge differences. They had a completely different worldview. Jefferson thought the state was the primary unit of government and the federal government was a voluntary association that enabled them to do certain kinds of things for one another. Of course, Hamilton believed that everything had to happen at the federal level, that states are incapable of understanding what are the primary interests of the national government. And as a consequence, he thought lots of things had to happen at a central government level, which of course frightened Mr. Jefferson. And it would have been great to have been a fly on the wall at those cabinet meetings that General Washington held when he was president of the United States, because Hamilton and Jefferson, two brilliant men, going back and forth with their various views. It had to have been an extraordinary exchange.
Now, Bill, we're going to talk about some thank you gifts in a moment, but one of the things we're going to be offering tonight is a book that you recently put together. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that book.
It's a book that was put together primarily for this rematch. We, Clay Jenkinson and I, talk an awful lot about what we think Jefferson and Hamilton would be saying in these situations. This is an opportunity for any of your viewers to actually sit down and read for themselves what Jefferson and Hamilton thought about several issues that certainly separated them and issues which bring out the differences between them. So this is a great opportunity for people who are going to be members of WHRO anyway, to get an item that will give them the opportunity to know what Jefferson and Hamilton actually said.
Become a member of WHRO right now at the $65 level, and you'll receive a special director's DVD version of tonight's program. The Great Debate, Jefferson versus Hamilton, the Rematch Special Edition DVD features extras not included in tonight's broadcast. A question and answer session with the audience, a bonus behind-the-scene montage that takes you backstage with the actors and the crew, plus you'll find 2 features on the Roper Theater's rich history that takes you back to 1926. At the $75 level of support, you will receive a personally autographed copy of Bill Crystal's newest book, Thomas Jefferson versus Alexander Hamilton in Their Own Words. This beautifully bound book details more of the great debate between these two political geniuses through their own words, directly from their own writings. If you pledge at the $120 level tonight, we will be happy to send you a DVD combo pack that features both the special edition of tonight's program along with the first great debate between Jefferson and Hamilton. And for your gift to WHRO at the $250 level of support, you'll receive both DVDs, the autographed copy of Bill Kristol's book, and you'll get 2 tickets for a tour of Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home in beautiful Charlottesville, Virginia. Explore and grow with WHRO. These gifts are one way that we can say thank you for your support of your public television station for Eastern Virginia and Northeastern North Carolina. Thank you.
What we need you to do is call 889-9476, or you can go online to WHRO.org and become a member here at WHRO, because it's really what makes this station run is our members. So what we want to do now, Clay couldn't be with us today in the studio, but we're going to go all the way out to halfway on the other side of the country and talk to Clay and get a message from Clay Jenkinson, who portrays Thomas Jefferson.
Hello, everyone. I'm Clay Jenkinson, a.k.a. Thomas Jefferson, on the program you're watching now. It is such fun to debate Alexander Hamilton. You know, Jefferson and Hamilton couldn't get along. They're both extraordinarily important American figures. Hamilton gave us the National Bank of the United States, a sound fiscal footing for the country, and he advocated a strong central government. And Jefferson, who was a quintessential Virginian, wanted a limited government, state-based government, no national debt, and he was suspicious of the financial system that Hamilton was promoting. It's such a joy to be on stage to debate Bill Kristol, and you see here one version of the great debate for the soul of the American Revolution, represented by these true extraordinary patriots. We love doing this sort of programming, and I know you love the work that WHRO does. Programs like American Experience and all those marvelous documentaries by Ken Burns that you watch here, they take history out of the textbook mode and bring it alive and make it relevant to our daily lives and the concerns we all share as Americans. You know, PBS reaches 65 million viewers, and it is consistently ranked as the best respected of all of our public institutions. We turn here to know more about history, to know more about the American experience, to know more about what's going on in the world, and to ground the daily business of life in the contextualization of the humanities. That's what public television and public radio do, and we are thrilled that you're a part of it. So pick up the phone, call WHRO, make your pledge, 889-9476. That helps this sort of programming thrive at the flagship station of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Clay. It's unfortunate you couldn't be here today, but it's so great to have you in the studio. Because now let's talk a little bit about your portrayal and how you got started doing all of this.
As I'm sure you know, Bert, I don't know if all of your audience knows, but I started out as the host of the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
That's right.
Clay Jenkinson referred to me for about 10 years as his semi-permanent guest host. That was a long time to be a semi-permanent guest host, but
right.
It was a role that I relished. And you know, when I started, I have a background as a historian, but I didn't know nearly as much about early American history, the federal period, as I needed to in order to be a host. And so I sort of grew in knowledge with the Jefferson Hour. Clay Jenkinson, of course, is the master portraying Jefferson. He is a Rhodes Scholar, a Danforth Fellow, a highly, highly accomplished human being. And Clay, you know, helped me understand and become conversant with American history. And early on, he thought it would be a good idea that I portray a character that Jefferson didn't always get along with. And so I began to portray John Adams. And Adams and Jefferson would take the stage. We've done it here in Norfolk.
Right.
Then eventually, Hamilton got added. That's a long story in and of itself. And so now I portray Hamilton, and Clay and I, we don't see each other all that often anymore. I'm no longer the host of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. So it almost feels like it's a blood feud when the two of us get on stage. Hamilton was brilliant. Jefferson, of course, was brilliant. They shared a different sort of interest, but hopefully you get a sense of us being rivals.
Well, we're going to more of the great debate right now. We're going to go and see some more of that debate, that clash between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. What we want you to do, though, is call the numbers on your screen, 889-9476, or that toll-free number, or go online to WHRO. Go back to the show. We'll see you in a little bit. Thanks.
can see you like Mr. Jefferson's history much more than you like my vision for the United States of America. Let me just say, if the shipyards close down, you'll change your mind. I hardly know where to begin. I was just defended by Mr. Jefferson, who used history in a way that I've never quite seen it done, but I believe you understand a problem that I had after my death. I died, of course, in 1804. My two greatest political enemies, Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Adams, both died on the same day, July 4th, 1826. That left them 22 years to say anything they wanted to about me. And they availed themselves of that opportunity greatly. And my story has been told by people who didn't like me. Particulars of what Mr. Jefferson was saying were true. Aspects of what he said were not true.
Which parts? I would like to know if I were in error, because I was really trying to be very fair.
Sir, I'm trying to be gentlemanly up here. I did not interrupt you.
I'm actually asking you to clarify the errors that I have made.
I'm having deja vu all over again, although the roles are reversed. I don't want to get into a discussion of your view of my history. One simple example. I became the Inspector General of the Army because General Washington, who Adams wanted to be the head of the Army, was in no position. He was an old man. There was no way that he could actually field an army, raise an army, train it, and make sure it was ready for battle. His choices among the most senior officers of the American Army were also Revolutionary War generals. They were a great deal older than I was. I was the only one with the youth, the vigor, and quite frankly, the abilities to form an army. And General Washington insisted that I be the Inspector General of the Army over the objections of John Adams, who did not like me at all. We had little use for one another. So that's one instance. You claim that I convinced Washington to make me the Inspector General. General Washington cared more about his reputation in this country than about any two other things. And he would not have threatened his reputation by allowing me to sequester myself in the folds of his camp again, unless he believed I was the very best person for the job. Did I want to attack South America? Did I want to march through Virginia? These are the kinds of innuendos and half-truths that have been perpetuated through the years, and I was, of course, in no position to defend myself. But rather than talk about this kind of thing, I think it's much more important that we look at America and what sort of country you want to live in. And I assume you're here tonight because you believe that we who lived in a different time can provide you some insights that will be useful to you. And at the risk of paraphrasing Mr. Jefferson's own views, let me just say that his presidency was a dangerous time in American history. We were woefully unprepared for military action, although he was the first to bloody our modern Navy. It was a difficult time, but he would have you believe that Colonel Burr, behind the scenes, agreed with certain Federalists in order to be considered for president. There is no evidence that Burr did that. There is, however, evidence that Federalists approached Mr. Jefferson, and in return for his agreement to maintain our funding system and other certain essentials of the government, he got Federalist support. Interesting how that didn't come out as we were discussing that topic. History, of course, is told by people who are not lacking in self-interest. Mr. Jefferson spent a great deal of time as an elderly man making sure that the historical record that he left behind would allow you to see him just as he wanted you to see him. There are many things that did not make it into that historical record. I, on the other hand, was championed by my wife, who survived me by 50 years, and who gathered up all of my papers and did everything that she could to ensure that my reputation would be enhanced. She even went so far as to sue one of my best friends during my lifetime, Rufus King, in order to obtain from him papers that proved that I had authored Washington's farewell address. Rufus King, Federals, Democratic Republicans, many people believed that news would be so offensive to the people of this country that it couldn't survive it. What? That I worked in conjunction with General Washington? We had done that throughout the war. That we had a unique sort of understanding that I was the perfect subordinate to him and he was my aegis? Well, such was the world that Mr. Jefferson presided over. People did not want you to know that I had done things on behalf of this country that were crucial and critical for its success. And they were not just my political enemies. In some cases, they were my dearest friends. I once said, this American world is not for me. I have done more than any other to prop up our frail Constitution. And in return, I have not only the ranting of my enemies, but the murmur of my friends for thanks. Study the founding generation, and you will find no one else who did any more to sacrifice for this United States. I was maligned as a person who was stealing from the Treasury Department, speculating in government funds. The Democratic Republicans engaged in forcing me to have reports presented before the House of Representatives that would demonstrate that nothing was amiss in the Treasury Department. Never was a cent found out of order. When Mr. Jefferson became President of the United States, he asked his Secretary of the Treasury, Albert Gallatin, to peruse the records of the Treasury Department. He was sure that there would be many examples of my wrongdoing and my stealing the public monies. And Gallatin returned to Mr. Jefferson. I'm sure you remember when Mr. Gallatin came to you and he said, "Sir, not only are there no problems with our financial system, Hamilton never took a cent, but it is the most perfect financial system that has ever been devised." Thank you. You are showing good sense. Much has been done since then to weaken it, things that I could not anticipate, the destruction of the National Bank, which was an incredibly important resource. Here again, I don't think Mr. Jefferson had the same concerns about the threat of war that General Washington and I had. We were fearful that we were ripe for European takeover. And a bank was a great way, a national bank was a great way for a nation to be able to borrow a great deal of money in a hurry in order to manufacture the kinds of supplies and necessities that would enable an army to stand in the field. We never again wanted to be in the place that we were in. I repeat myself, during the Revolution, when literally General Washington, and I usually wrote the letters, would beg continental governors, including Mr. Jefferson, for support for our troops in the field. Support that too often was not forthcoming. I truly do not understand what inspired the common soldiers of our revolution to stay in the field when they realized that they had so little support, not only from the national government, such as it existed, but also from the states. And let me say this, one of the principal differences between Mr. Jefferson and me is that I had that experience during the Revolution, and he did not. After famously writing the Declaration of Independence, he returned to Virginia and certainly faced numerous challenges as the governor of Virginia, difficulties that later embarrassed him, and he needed Mr. Madison to help clear his record. I, on the other hand, served in the Army. I watched, literally, people bleed and die for want of the things that any soldier in the field has a right to expect. And I said, never again. That I believed that the military was a necessity was not because I was martial in my outlook. I believed that we needed a strong military because we had a great deal that was free for the taking by other countries if we could not defend ourselves. In our earliest days, we had to be neutral, and that is something that Mr. Jefferson and I could discuss. He certainly believed that we ought to support the French after the revolution had occurred in their European war. General Washington and I realized that would be ruinous. We couldn't even defend ourselves. How could we get involved in European conflict? And besides, we had made our treaty with Louis XVI, who had been beheaded by that point. It was an entirely different government that was running France at that point. And a nation has got to be concerned with its own self-interest. It cannot allow itself to be caught up in the interests of other countries. Always it must concern itself with its own self-interest. And I did say, Mr. Jefferson, along those lines, that you had a womanish resentment of Great Britain and a womanish attachment to France, which you'll have to pardon me, ladies. That sort of thing was not intended to slight you. It was my way of saying Mr. Jefferson was emotional about decisions that needed to be decided in a purely rational way. I mean, France had not sided with us during the Revolution because they thought we were the greatest country on earth and because they believed in liberty. They wanted to go to war against their enemy, Britain, on the cheap. Let's be realistic about that. And I prided myself on my ability to reason basic causes. And I understood that people are more often governed by their emotions than they are by rational thought. In fact, I said, government is necessary because the passions of man will not conform to the dictates of reason and justice without constraint. That's why we had that Constitution and the new government, because the passions of men will not conform to the dictates of reason and justice without constraint. Passions, womanish decision-making. We could ill afford it. Our goal as a young nation was to survive, not to involve ourselves in foreign wars, but to survive and to become strong enough so that in time we could defend ourselves against any possible invader. And I like to think that the America that you live in today is the inheritor of that vision.
Well, first of all, Mr. Hamilton, I'm sorry, I meant no offense. I was really defending your way of putting me into the presidential chair in 1800, and I really do want you at some point to explain, if you would, and I'm asking this out of pure historical curiosity, that 54-page pamphlet that you wrote attacking the sitting incumbent of your party, John Adams. But
would you give me the opportunity at this point, or do you want me to wait
I don't know, I was
mute
another
until
one
you
of
move
these
on
long
to several
ones?
other things?
No, please, please.
Well, I will remain seated and give you the short version. I don't believe that pamphlet caused a single vote to be cast in a way that it wasn't going to be cast beforehand. It reached people so late. Why did I write it? I actually wrote it for my small group of intimate Federalist friends because I thought they genuinely needed to understand what an unfit president John Adams was. He was the worst person to occupy that White House in my time, and I include Mr. Jefferson as one of the three who occupied that office. John Adams was a disaster. He threw tantrums. He yelled and screamed at his advisors. His cabinet despised him, and he would not take their advice. I wrote, the ablest person can profit from advice. What manner of man does Mr. Adams think that he is that he does not need it? And my goodness, he did need it. But that document appeared on the scenes late. It was written to my intimate friends, and as I understand it, Aaron Burr intercepted a copy of it, and in the service of the Democratic Republican ticket, reprinted it and distributed it as widely as possible. Is that true, Mr. Jefferson? That it was Colonel Burr, your associate?
He is said to have played a role in that, yes.
Okay. Well, that's the story behind the pamphlet. I was deemed insane for doing that. I also was believed to be insane for showing up at a duel when I had no intention of firing at my opponent, Colonel Burr. But I must tell you, I believed in truth, and I believed in honor, and I thought the truth had to be spoken to the people of the United States through their representatives that I knew, that John Adams was entirely unfit for the office of president, a man who throws himself into frenzies and rages and treats others with absolute disrespect, should not ever occupy the Oval Office.
I never thought I would be in the position of needing now to defend John Adams. John Adams had a chance to fight a war with France in 1798 or 1799, and at first he was so offended by something called the XYZ affair that he asked Congress to have measures for a provisional army and defense measures and so on. And then it seemed that time went by and we were getting mixed signals from the French Directory, and finally Adams thought, instead of continuing down this path of war preparation, which was becoming highly unpopular because it was heavy taxation and because of the manner in which that provisional army was being administered, he decided to send this extraordinary second mission off to France. And he did so somewhat secretly. He didn't consult his cabinet. He just announced it. Some changes were made. Instead of one person going, three went. And they were able to conclude a peace settlement with the Directory. And as you know, John Adams later in his life said that he wanted to be remembered in history as the man who had the courage to send that second diplomatic mission to France, that of all the things that he ever did, that this is the one that he was most proud of because he had taken the extra measure for diplomacy and secured peace rather than descending into war. I regard that as a remarkable achievement, however much it may have offended others. So I'm going to defend Adams for doing that, because peace should be our passion, and we should always make sure that war is the very, very last lamentable outcome of diplomacy that breaks down.
Indeed.
And nothing in Adams' life gave me more pride in my friendship with him than that act of statesmanship, because that too cost him re-election as president in 1800. So you wanted to talk about vision. Let us do that. Mr. Hamilton said at the end of his life, and he quoted it tonight, that the Constitution was, quote, a shilly-shally thing, a thing of milk and water, a frail and worthless fabric. I don't see it that way at all. Now, I should say, I was not at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. Alexander Hamilton was. I was serving as the American minister to the court of Louis XVI, so that I was in France, and so I was not a member of the 55-member delegation that met between May and September of 1787. I was fascinated by this. Here we were, frustrated with the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, now gathering to write a completely new constitution equal to the emerging dynamics of American life. And here were the most extraordinary men of America, 55 of them, including my closest friend Madison, but the great Washington. Dr. Franklin was there. This was an assembly of luminaries. And they had a closed-door protocol that everything that happened within the convention hall was a secret and would not be promulgated to the world, lest there be unnecessary interference from the outside. And so I watched from Paris with extraordinary fascination to see what would emerge. And when they finally finished in September of 1787, 3 members of the Constitutional Convention sent me drafts of the new Constitution. My closest friend Madison, the president of the convention, George Washington, and Dr. Franklin. When I read these, I was surprised and very concerned about how strong the new Constitution was. I liked what I called the good old venerable fabric of the Articles of Confederation. Under the Articles of Confederation, each state was a sovereign nation. So Massachusetts was a nation, and Virginia was a nation, and New Hampshire was a nation, and they had come together in a limited confederacy to do certain national and international things. But in all domestic concerns, Virginia remained a sovereign commonwealth. I believe in that. I prefer that to what replaced it. The new Constitution has too much central authority. It gathers up the power and sovereignty of the country into one head. And if it were that powerful in 1787, I figured, it could only grow more powerful and more powerful still in the course of American history. I said, this is like bringing in a fox to police the hen house. And so I worried that this instrument was far too strong. And then if you add to that, now it's been ratified by 12 of the 13 states, including, reluctantly, Virginia. Almost the minute the first administration began, Mr. Hamilton was the Secretary of the Treasury. He's putting our finances in order. he decides that the only way to make this work is to have a national bank of the United States. Now, we can agree or disagree about whether a national bank is a good idea. I happen to think it's a disastrous idea, but that's not my point here. When the Founding Fathers created Article 1 of the Constitution, enumerating the powers of Congress, they gave power the right to coin money, to levy taxes, to draft troops, to engage in diplomacy. There's a long list of enumerated powers that our government can undertake through Congress. It's very thorough. And none of those enumerated powers said a national bank of the United States. Do you understand this? Our security is in having a written constitution that draws a line around power and prevents it from moving in dangerous directions in a self-created way. You enumerate the powers of government to limit the capacity of government to control our lives. And so now we're 2 or 3 years into our national experiment, and Hamilton wants a national bank. If he really wants a national bank, the remedy is to go to the people and say, we didn't think of this at the Constitutional Convention. We now believe that it's important, even essential. But the only way to make it legitimate is to turn back to you, the sovereign, and ask you to amend that Constitution to enable us to do something we now regard as essential but wasn't included in the thing that you ratified. That's the proper mechanism, to return to the sovereign. But that's not what Mr. Hamilton wanted to do. He wrote a famous paper to George Washington, and he said, well, we don't have to amend the Constitution to enable the National Bank of the United States, even though it's not enumerated by the Founding Fathers. He said, it's implied. It's implied in the Constitution. And when he was asked how, he said, well, in the preamble, there's something called the General Welfare Clause. And he said, that implies a bank. And then at the end of the Constitution, there's something called the Necessary and Proper Clause, that the government has the right to do what is necessary and proper to implement the enumerated powers. And he said, there's your national bank. Well, I'm a strict constructionist. I believe that our security is in having a written constitution that tells us exactly what government can do and exactly what it cannot do. And once you step beyond that boundary, you've entered a field of boundless abusiveness no longer capable of any restraint. I said, if you're going to have implied powers, you may as well write your Constitution on wax and stretch it into any shape that pleases you from moment to moment. Washington agreed with Alexander Hamilton, and the National Bank of the United States was born. So not only was the Constitution that was drafted in Philadelphia enormously strong and centralized, erosive of states' rights, but almost before it got started, thanks to Mr. Hamilton, we added the doctrine of implied powers, which says that government can more or less do whatever it wants to do if it's for the general welfare of the United States. I regard that as effectively nullifying our security in having a written constitution. We've doubled the size of our republic with a single stroke of my pen. Not a single musket was fired, not a single soldier was sent into the field. We doubled the size of the American Republic for 3 cents per acre. Was it strictly constitutional? No.
You've been watching the great debate, The Rematch. Now, this program was recorded live in Norfolk in October 2012 at the Roper Theater in downtown Norfolk. And it was the rematch because a couple of years ago, we brought you the original debate between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, a sold-out show that was wildly popular in the region. So we had to bring them both back for this rematch of the great debate. And we want you to be able to support programs like this, and you can do that with your call of membership support. 889-9476 is the number to call, toll free. It's 1-800-940-7170. Or, of course, you can go online to WHRO. And of course, we have great thank you gifts we want to talk about real briefly. If you want to get a copy of this very program today, the DVD of this show is available for you. You get a behind the scenes look at the production as they're getting their makeup done and some conversations behind the curtain, if you will. You get a great look at the Roper Theater, the venue that this debate took place at. That's a wonderful piece of history. You'll get to learn about the great theater. And there was a Q&A session done live at the theater that night. That is not part of tonight's program, but it is part of the DVD. So you get all those extras when you get the DVD at the $65 level. Now, of course, Bill Kristol has put together a great book. Again, tell the viewers a little bit about that book.
Jefferson, of course, and Hamilton never debated. Mr. Jefferson would have never, he didn't even speak in public. He was not a good public speaker, had a very soft voice, and we think a speech impediment. So debates didn't happen between the two of them. If you want to find out how they differed, you have to look at their primary source writings. And this is a collection of how they believed about 5 different issues, and in their own words, you get a chance to go through and you begin to get a sense of how different Hamilton is from Jefferson. That their view of what government is vastly different, and of course you realize that Jefferson's very afraid of a government that has too much power, and Hamilton is very, very much afraid of a government that doesn't have enough power to command the respect of its citizens.
So those words have been brought together in this book that Bill Kristol's put together. You can get that book, and I believe you'll autograph the book?
Be happy to autograph it.
So at $75, you can get a copy of that book. The tone and the content from the rematch was very different from the first debate a couple years ago.
I can honestly tell you that I've been with Clay Jenkinson for probably 25 years now. I've performed as his antagonist on numerous occasions, and I saw Clay do something for this debate that I have never seen him do before. He had, as you will notice, pages and pages of notes.
He was ready for you.
He told me last time after the first debate, he said, "I'm gunning for you." And he came with notes and information. You will see Clay has his binder with him up in front, and he's referring to things continuously. I had a feeling of paranoia while this was going on. I thought, oh my gosh. But Hamilton, of course, could make his case in any situation that Mr. Jefferson can
at one
bring
point,
forward.
The viewers may notice, when you walked out really at the beginning, you walked out with a cane.
It was no prop. That cane was real. At that point, I was probably 2 weeks, 3 weeks from having torn a tendon, and so I was in great pain.
I remember talking to you before the show and really concerned a few days before if you were going to be able to walk out on stage and how we were going to be able to handle that.
I was moving slowly, and it was for real.
Well, we're glad to see you're walking much better today.
I'm walking better, but I hope I got some sympathy for having a cane in the last episode.
Become a member of WHRO right now at the $65 level, and you'll receive a special director's DVD version of tonight's program. The Great Debate, Jefferson versus Hamilton, the Rematch Special Edition DVD features extras not included in tonight's broadcast. A question and answer session with the audience, a bonus behind-the-scene montage that takes you backstage with the actors and the crew, plus you'll find 2 features on the Roper Theater's rich history that takes you back to 1926. At the $75 level of support, you will receive a personally autographed copy of Bill Kristol's newest book, Thomas Jefferson versus Alexander Hamilton in Their Own Words. This beautifully bound book details more of the great debate between these 2 political geniuses through their own words, directly from their own writings. If you pledge at the $120 level tonight, we will be happy to send you a DVD combo pack that features both the special edition of tonight's program, along with the first great debate between Jefferson and Hamilton. And for your gift to WHRO at the $250 level of support, you'll receive both DVDs, the autographed copy of Bill Kristol's book, and you'll get 2 tickets for a tour of Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home in beautiful Charlottesville, Virginia. Explore and grow with WHRO. These gifts are one way that we can say thank you for your support of your public television station for Eastern Virginia and Northeastern North Carolina. Thank you.
We're going back to the show in just a minute, but we do hope you will take a few minutes and become a member to WHRO by calling the numbers on the screen. We've got the great volunteers waiting for your calls to support. Call the 800 number or the local number, whatever works for you. Go online, WHRO.org. But most importantly, we want you to be one of the newest members of the WHRO family. When you make this happen, when you make public broadcasting a part of your life, you make public broadcasting better for everybody. We're going back to the great debate. We'll be back with you in a few minutes, but enjoy the great debate between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton.
Let us suppose that we form a republic. You elect certain of us to be your officials, and you tell us that we can go bring your vision into reality, but only if we continue to return to you to get your permission. That's what Mr. Jefferson is saying. I believe that sovereignty shifted from the state to the federal government with the ratification of the Constitution by the states. It shifted insofar as now it was not the responsibility of Virginia or Massachusetts to decide what was the best policy for it. It was the responsibility of the federal government, which was not made up only of plutocrats from New York, but from people in each and every state. I said there are many things. There are many things that a government is allowed to do. There are certainly other things that it's not permitted to do. But there is a great deal of ground in the middle over which men of good conscience and virtue can disagree. And this is one of those areas. I would like to add a couple of little postscripts by way of our conversation here. When Mr. Madison was President of the United States, the charter of the National Bank was renewed. And when Mr. Jefferson was President of the United States, this strict constructionist purchased Louisiana, which was a wonderful thing for the country, but the greatest act of implied powers that had taken place up to that date, the things that I accomplished were small and paled alongside of it. And Mr. Jefferson was chagrined because he realized he had done the very thing that when he was an opposition politician, he had condemned me and the other Federalists for doing. Let me just say this, it's one thing to be an opposition member, it's another thing to be in the White House and to know that you have to do that which is best for all of the people of the United States of America. Thank God, Mr. Jefferson was the man that I thought he was. I said he has some pretensions to character, unlike Colonel Burr. And I'm glad he was president. And I'm glad that when Bonaparte, here again through no wisdom on our part, but through necessity on his own, remember, it's all interest is self-interest. When Bonaparte needed a lot of capital in a hurry and no longer had a military force that could threaten us, he had lost so many soldiers in Santo Domingo, he offered this to us. And it was a great boon. I was one of the few Federalists who saw beyond political opposition, and I said, this is a great thing for the people of the United States, but don't give him much credit for it.
I believe that the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, during my first term as president, was one of the making moments of America's destiny. That we were separated by 3,000 miles of Atlantic Ocean from the havoc and madness of the Old World. But with the settlement of 1783, our western boundary was the Mississippi River. That's still a huge republic, larger than any republic that the history had ever seen before. But it made us vulnerable on the west bank of the Mississippi. And the Louisiana Territory, so-called, had been controlled by Spain and France, and they had sort of traded it back and forth through the course of the 18th century. And now I became president, and there was immediate difficulty in the West because the Spanish and the French were shutting off the Mississippi River to our commerce. Well, if you've studied a map of North America, the Mississippi drains 3/8 of our territory, and in our time, rivers were highways. Our commerce found its way to market by way of the Ohio and the Tennessee and the Potomac and the James and the great Mississippi. And so whatever nation shuts the mouth of the Mississippi off has strangled American commerce. And so this was presented to me by Western interests, particularly in Kentucky and on the Mississippi itself. And so I sent my friend and protege James Monroe off to join Robert Livingston in Paris to try to buy the village of New Orleans. If we could purchase New Orleans or another port of deposit in the lower Mississippi, we could put troops there and we could keep that river open to American commerce under international law. Congress was prepared to spend about $6 million to obtain the village of New Orleans. As Mr. Hamilton rightly says, Napoleon, for reasons best known to himself, without any invitation from my diplomats or from myself, suddenly, in a counteroffer, said not New Orleans for $6 million, but the Louisiana Territory for $15.6 million. Think of that. We were going to spend $6 million for a village, and instead, for $15 million, I bought what I called an empire for liberty such as the world has never seen. We doubled the size of our republic with a single stroke of my pen. Not a single musket was fired, not a single soldier was sent into the field. We doubled the size of the American republic for 3 cents per acre. Was it strictly constitutional? No. I freely acknowledge this. But listen to what I did. This is a little subtle, but the subtlety that I'm pointing to is that when Colonel Hamilton proposed a national bank, that was a deliberative measure. It's something that he decided we needed, and he put it into the system, and it was approved, and the national bank was created. But there was no temporal urgency to this. It was a routine extension of the powers of government to bring about a project that Mr. Hamilton thought was important. The difference is that when Napoleon offered us the Louisiana Territory in 1803, I called it a fugitive occurrence. It was something that suddenly appeared on my desk. It isn't something that we had sought. We weren't sitting around looking for ways to expand the powers of government. A foreign national said, "Here, would you like to double the size of your republic for 3 cents per acre?" And suddenly I'm faced with this. I am a strict constructionist. I don't want to expand the powers of government in this way. In my opinion, the Louisiana Purchase is unconstitutional, technically, from 2 points of view. First of all, nothing in the Constitution enumerates the power to acquire so much territory. And secondly, there's no provision in the Constitution to incorporate this new territory by way of new states. And so I did what I think a responsible statesman should do. In the summer of 1803, I drafted 2 constitutional amendments, one that would have authorized the purchase, and the second that would authorize the incorporation by the way of new territories. And my intention was to promulgate those to you, the sovereign, and let you decide. And if you said no, then I would have to get out of the scrape as best I could. But the problem with a fugitive occurrence, instead of a routine one, is that Napoleon was now showing signs of seller's remorse. And he was telling his diplomats, if the U.S. Senate has a protracted debate about this, we will pull the treaty and withdraw it. Mr. Madison, who was much more in line with Mr. Hamilton's realism than he was with my idealism, but who was my Secretary of State, came to me. He said, "Mr. Jefferson, you mustn't issue those constitutional amendments. If you do, we are probably going to lose this once in a millennium, once in a planet's history opportunity." And so I said to my wise advisor from Montpelier, "What would you suggest that I do?" And he said, "Mr. Jefferson, make the purchase on behalf of human liberty, and we will finesse the constitutional question somehow." Matthew Lyon, a congressman from Vermont, was given 4 months of a jail sentence for speaking of the Adams administration and using the phrase unbounded thirst for ridiculous pomp, foolish adulation, and selfish avarice. For that, he received 4 months in jail.
Why are you pointing at me? Do I seem to be... Mr. Jefferson, I don't have any skin in this game, as people today might say.
Well, you know what? That's not quite true.
A year ago, WHRO brought you the great debate between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. Tonight, we bring you the rematch. We've been enjoying this great debate. My name is Bert Schmidt. I'm the president of WHRO, and we are thrilled to have Bill Crystal, who portrays Alexander Hamilton, with us in the studio today. And we've been talking about, well, you've been talking about the Louisiana Purchase.
I think a lot of people who are not historians don't know a lot of what went on behind the scenes, but purchasing Louisiana was a very difficult thing for Jefferson to do because he had spent his life understanding the Constitution as a very, very limited document. And in order to purchase Louisiana, he had to expand his understanding of it, and it made him very, very uncomfortable. He, of course, explains why he wanted to do a couple of constitutional amendments so all the people could say, yes, this is a good idea. But unfortunately, time wouldn't permit that to happen. And of course, Hamilton would say, of course it wouldn't. That's why the central government needs that sort of power, and it can do it. And you know, it was proof of the efficacy of Hamilton's own point of view. To me, it's one of the great pieces of the entire program, because you realize, yeah, Hamilton's right. As much as you want to go to the people and refer every question to them, it's not, mechanically, it's not something you can do. You need to have representatives that you trust.
That's right. So, folks, we want you to become a member. That's why we've taken a little break from the debate. 889-9476 is the number to call. Toll free is 800-940-7170, or you can go online to WHRO.org and point, click, and contribute. And, of course, we've got some great thank you gifts.
Become a member of WHRO right now at the $65 level, and you'll receive a special Director's DVD version of tonight's program. The Great Debate, Jefferson versus Hamilton, the Rematch Special Edition DVD features extras not included in tonight's broadcast. A question and answer session with the audience, a bonus behind-the-scene montage that takes you backstage with the actors and the crew, plus you'll find 2 features on the Roper Theater's rich history that takes you back to 1926. At the $75 level of support, you will receive a personally autographed copy of Bill Crystal's newest book, Thomas Jefferson versus Alexander Hamilton in Their Own Words. This beautifully bound book details more of the great debate between these 2 political geniuses through their own words, directly from their own writings. If you pledge at the $120 level tonight, we will be happy to send you a DVD combo pack that features both the special edition of tonight's program, along with the first great debate between Jefferson and Hamilton. And for your gift to WHRO at the $250 level of support, you'll receive both DVDs, the autographed copy of Bill Crystal's book, and you'll get 2 tickets for a tour of Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home in beautiful Charlottesville, Virginia. Explore and grow with WHRO. These gifts are one way that we can say thank you for your support of your public television station for Eastern Virginia and Northeastern North Carolina. Thank you.
I must say, having participated in both of these debates with Clay, each of them is pretty different. We talk about some of the same issues, but a lot of different ground is covered in each one of them. So I think if you own the one and say, well, I've seen these guys, I don't need the other one, I'd rethink that. Yeah. I think you can get a lot out of both of them, and I think it's a wonderful thing for people who are going to support WHRO anyway to get a hold of them, and if you see them and like them, you don't have to keep them on a shelf somewhere. You can send them to children or grandchildren. You can give them to schools. I think this is quality telling of American history, and I hope the listeners will become missionaries and get that information out there where there is so much bad American history being told.
And Bill, we're thrilled to have you here today, but we also were able to get Clay to talk for a few minutes about from his perspective about things going on. So we're going to get a message here from Clay Jenkinson, who portrays Thomas Jefferson.
Hello everyone, I'm Clay Jenkinson, aka Thomas Jefferson. On the program here now watching on WHRO, This is one of two debates that I've had with Bill Kristol as Alexander Hamilton. You know, Jefferson didn't like Hamilton. Hamilton didn't like Jefferson. Jefferson said they fought like two cocks in the cabinet of George Washington. Hamilton wanted a strong central government and national debt, a sound fiscal business, banks, a strong military. Jefferson wanted a limited government based in states' rights and state authority, no national debt if possible, isolationism, a nation of farmers. They're the yin and yang of American history, and that debate between Jefferson and Hamilton continues to this day. I love debating Bill Kristol. He's a spirited Hamilton, and he usually gets the best of Jefferson. But I think you all agree that Jefferson had the vision of this country that we should have followed and may still at some point. At any rate, this is the sort of thing that public radio and public television do. We're thrilled that WHRV is the flagship station of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. We love our listeners here. I love coming to perform and talk in the Norfolk area. We're also delighted that WHRO carries programs like The American Experience and all of those fabulous documentaries by Ken Burns, some of which I've had the chance to be in. This is the sort of programming that Americans want and trust. You know, more than 65 million Americans watch public television, and public television is consistently ranked as the most respected and trusted public institution in the United States. So if you agree, and I know you do, pick up the phone and call 889-9476 and donate generously to WHRO and WHRV for this sort of programming. And now, back to the debate between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Thanks.
Thanks, Clay. And so again, you can become a member of WHRO by calling 889-9476 or that toll-free number 800-940-7170 or going online to WHRO.org. And again, we are going into a next segment of the Great Debate. And what can people expect in this part?
Well, I suspect the first thing that a viewer will notice is that it's getting a little more heated. And
a little bit.
I believe I share with the audience a term that most of them have probably never heard before. It's a Jefferson term, and I hope all of you will add it to your vocabulary. The term is twistification, and you will get to see Mr. Jefferson using it in action.
Yeah, absolutely, and got some great reactions from the audience as well. And this program was brought to you because we have members who have made this program possible. Members that came to us, you know, really, we've had the Jefferson Hour on our radio station for a long time. It's been a very popular program. And then the idea of bringing together both of you and your long history with the radio program to bring you together a couple years ago for that first debate. And it was one of the few things that the Roper sold out. And talking to the manager at the Roper, he said that was one of the things that sold out fastest that entire season was your great debate. So after that production, we said we've got to get you guys back in the venue together. So it was thrilling to be able to bring both of you back on stage, and the audience had such a great time. And you get the chance to experience if you actually missed the show that night. So become a member. 889-9476 is the number to call. You can get, again, let's run through those premiums real briefly for you. At the $65 level, you can get the DVD of tonight's show with all those great extras. You can get the behind-the-scenes footage. You get the history of the Roper, as well as the Q&A session that follows the debate. At the $75 level, you get Bill Kristol's book, which brings together the words of Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. At the $120 level, you get both the original Great Debate as well as tonight's rematch. And at the $250 level, you get both DVDs and you get the autographed book that Bill Kristol put together. Bill will sign that book for you. And you can get tickets to Monticello. So, coming up next.
Coming up next, it's going to get a little acrimonious, even more so than in the past, because the Alien and Sedition Acts are being discussed. And both Hamilton and Jefferson have a bone to pick with the other.
Well, we're going to go right back to that debate right now, folks. We want you to become a member. The volunteers are sticking around. 889-9476, that toll-free number online, whatever works. But become a member of WHRO. We're going back to the great debate. We'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks.
I would like to teach all of you a new word this evening. It was a word coined by Mr. Jefferson in a letter to Mr. Madison. You have just experienced it at work. It's called twistification. A grand twistification. Actually, I agree with the conclusion. I think the purchase of Louisiana was a great boon to the people of the United States of America. The point I was simply trying to make is that it's a different thing to be an opposition politician, and it's another to be in office. Now, Mr. Jefferson did say one thing that troubled me. He seemed to imply that it's good for presidents to be reactive rather than proactive. And that, of course, does not accord with my view at all. As a young officer during the Revolution, I carried a commonplace book with me. Actually, it was my company's pay book, and I wrote all sorts of things down in it. One of them was a quote from Demosthenes. And I said, "As a general marches at the head of his troops, so ought wise politicians, if I could use that term, march at the head of affairs. They should make things happen rather than wait and react to those things which occur." I believe the liberties of the people of the United States of America are too important to be left to one who sits and reacts, although I certainly agree with that reaction. It's important for us to anticipate all of the things that take place. We lived in a dangerous world. You live in a dangerous world. Would you be content to know that your government is waiting for something to happen so that they can react to it? Or would you like to think that your government is marching at the head of affairs, seeing and anticipating those things that are likely to take place and addressing them before they become problems? The history of the American people, unfortunately, is one in which we too often react after the fact. But here again, I hearken back to my experience during the war. I said never again would we be in a position where our victory over Britain was something of a miracle. I said that later on. It was more a miracle than it was due to our martial success. And our lack of martial success was due more than anything else to the fact that we could not field a regular force because the states, with their governments, were unwilling to pay the cost of the freedom of people in other states. I think it's a wonderful idea for you Virginians to be sovereign. And the next time an enemy fleet approaches you, I hope that the Navy of the state of Virginia will sail out and defeat it. We needed one another. It was absolutely essential that all states work together and all cooperate. But here again, all interest is self-interest. And the self-interest of farmers in Virginia is not going to be to pay taxes for a navy or for an army, a standing army. It's going to be to make as much money as they can possibly make. Someone who sees the bigger picture, a federal government, must be in position to make those decisions for all of you. And I pray that that government will be composed of what I called fit men, virtuous people, people who put the interests of their own country before they put the interests of the people who pay for their reelection or who demand that they change course when it's an unadvisable thing to do. I believe it's essential that we have politicians with the courage to speak the truth. I spoke the truth about John Adams because I believe that certain people needed to know how horribly he had governed the United States of America. Self-destructive, perhaps, but as a young man in my first major political pamphlet, I quoted an ancient phrase. Actually, it's a phrase that came to me from my mentor, Dr. Knox, on the island of St. Croix. And that phrase is, "The truth is powerful and will prevail." The truth is powerful and will prevail. If you disagree, keep silent. I always endeavored to speak the truth, and it was as often unpalatable to members of my own party as to members of another party. Before we move on, Mr. Jefferson, I would like to respond to my reference to the Constitution as a shilly-shally thing, as a document with little substance. That came at a time in my life when I had experienced many, many difficulties, not the least of which was watching the power of the Constitution be eroded by people with views similar to your own. And I refer in this instance to the time during the Alien and Sedition Laws' existence. And by the way, I didn't like them. I had nothing to do with promulgating them. I wasn't in government. But I knew that we had a mechanism with this Constitution to address bad laws. It could be reviewed judicially and declared unconstitutional. The laws could expire and be replaced by new laws. There were many options that were provided in the Constitution for getting rid of bad laws. One option not provided for was for gentlemen in secret to send resolutions to two state legislatures that declared they were under no onus whatsoever to obey laws that seemed to them to be unconstitutional. That did more to damage that fabric, that frail fabric, the Constitution, than anything else. I saw it as a direct assault on the government of the United States of America. Because when citizens begin to believe that it is all right to disobey law, what's around the corner? It's actually the thing that Mr. Jefferson feared more than anything else, and he saw it happening through Federalists like me, but the reality was going to be that people that he had nurtured, like Colonel Burr, would seize power of a government that no longer had the confidence of its people. And that would truly be the end of liberty in this country. Shilly-shally only because there were men who were being paid by the government of the United States who, to borrow a phrase from Mr. Jefferson, like sappers and miners, were doing everything they could behind the scenes to undermine its authority and the confidence it had in the minds of the American people.
Well, let me just say a word about the Sedition and Alien Acts. It is true that Mr. Hamilton was skeptical of that legislation when it was passed in 1798. In other words, this had little to do with his own agency as a shadow member of the cabinet in the Adams administration. This really came out of the Congress of the United States. It didn't come from Mr. Hamilton's pen. But there were let me say what the sedition law was first. The Alien Law, passed in 1798, allowed the executive of the United States to banish from this country any foreign national that it regarded as a security threat without due process. That anyone the government of the United States said is a security threat to this country could be expelled from America without any due process or appeal of any sort. That's the Alien Law. The Sedition Law, passed that summer, says that it is a criminal offense to criticize the conduct of the United States government during this crisis. And let me tell you about some of those prosecutions. There was no Federalist newspaper or pamphlet that was prosecuted under the Sedition Law, only Republican. In other words, it was used as a naked partisan tool. Number two, there were 5 major newspapers in the United States at the time. 4 of them were prosecuted under the Sedition Law. Let me give you examples of some of the things that were prosecuted. One author said that the government of the United States is allowing the wealthy to prosper at the expense of the common man. He was thrown into jail and fined under the Sedition Law of the United States. Matthew Lyon, a congressman from Vermont, was given 4 months of a jail sentence for speaking of the Adams administration and using the phrase unbounded thirst for ridiculous pomp, foolish adulation, and selfish avarice. For that, he received 4 months in jail.
Why are you pointing at me? Do I seem to be... Mr. Jefferson, I don't have any skin in this game, as people today might say.
Well, you know what? That's not quite true.
No, I don't.
Because you later became less concerned about the Sedition Law, and you actually praised some of its provisions, and you said on 2 occasions, and I'll quote if you wish, that you thought many of these resident aliens should be banished from this country. So don't say that you had nothing to do with these laws, sir.
I didn't. I had nothing to do with their promulgation. I had nothing to do with their support. Were there dangerous aliens living in the United States of America at that time? I think I believe that some of the French people that you had so much respect for could perhaps have been dangerous to us. You think of Citizen Genet involving himself in the affairs of the United States government, seeking to appeal to the American people, ignoring the government that all of us are a part of. There was a lot of history that you have not backed up to cite to help set the tone for this kind of thing.
I'm citing it right now, sir.
Nor, by the way, sir, have you mentioned that when you became president, prosecution continued, but being a state sovereigntist as you were, it was done by states' attorneys general prosecuting journalists for libel rather than at the federal level. That was a wonderful states' rights thing that you did. I actually defended one of them, and his only crime had been to state a truth about you, sir. So, and I said, and it became law later, that stating the truth is if the truth is involved, it's not libel. It's the truth. Remember, the truth is powerful and will prevail. So truth became a defense in libel.
So, if I may resume, the minute I became president, I freed everyone who had been jailed under the sedition law and had their fines remitted. And I wrote in my second inaugural address that the government of the United States, that is the government that I administered as the third president of the United States, engaged in no prosecutions of the press at any level in spite of the most gross, sometimes personal attacks. What happened in Pennsylvania and other states, I leave to those states to determine. I'm going to go on, sir.
You had nothing to do with it. This comes as a surprise to me, sir. If you are not concerned about what is being said and you think that such a law is a bad law, why didn't you come to the defense of Harry Croswell in the state of New York when he was being tried for libel simply because he had said something about you which was true?
I know you're trying to create this sense of innuendo, but let me just say that
it's not exactly a twistification.
May I please continue, sir?
Indeed.
My theory of the Constitution, which I have articulated here, is that the national government of the United States should remain within its own portfolio and do those things which have been enumerated by the Founding Fathers in that instrument, the Constitution. Then the individual states, Pennsylvania and South Carolina and North Carolina, are sovereign within their own borders. And so if something or other is happening in North Carolina or Georgia, the President of the United States is not empowered, either in legal theory or in good sense, to intrude his own opinions in that zone. But what happens at the national governmental level is certainly his province. So finally, let me just complete this statement, now 4 times interrupted, by saying that one Republican editor after 1798 called Alexander Hamilton's Provisional Army, quote, a standing army. And for this he was fined $200, which is half a year's salary, and put in jail for 2 months. These were the sort of prosecutions that occurred under the Alien and Sedition laws. These were not modest attempts to prevent the most treasonous utterances from undermining the sovereignty and the security of the United States. These laws, the Alien and Sedition laws, were used as nakedly partisan attempts to shut down an opposition press and to expel from this country people that the Federalist Party didn't like. These were palpable violations of the Bill of Rights. We're now just a handful of years into our new Constitution. We have the most splendid Bill of Rights on earth that protects free speech. And in the first war crisis in American history, the Federalists passed the Alien and Sedition laws because they do not have a robust sense of the democratic culture of the United States, where these sorts of disagreements can occur, and we should cherish them. You know, Voltaire, the great French philosophe, said, "Madam, I disagree with what you say, but I shall defend to the death your right to say it." That's the American ideal, sir.
Indeed. And you will notice in my last time standing, I mentioned the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, and Mr. Jefferson did not reply to those statements. So I guess I will be forced to try to explain what I think Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Madison did. Now, by the way, Mr. Jefferson has shown us that the Constitution worked. There was a change in office, and the Alien and Sedition Acts went away. Perhaps it took longer than he would have liked, but a bad law disappeared. A series of bad laws were no longer the law of the land. That I consider to be a great statement in behalf of our Constitution, but Mr. Jefferson was too impatient to let the law work. Being the activist that he was, he and Mr. Madison conceived to write, each would write a set of resolutions for a state legislature. Mr. Madison wrote resolutions for the state of Virginia. Mr. Jefferson wrote resolutions for the state of Kentucky. They were passed to close associates, and they were presented anonymously as if they had percolated up from the legislatures of these particular houses, these two House of Representatives in the individual states. They hadn't. And where do I have difficulty with this? Well, both Mr. Madison and Mr. Jefferson had sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. And they were, behind the scenes, in their impatience for bad laws to be expunged, undermining the Constitution of the United States. Friends, this country exists for one reason and one reason alone: because you have confidence in the abilities of your elected officials. You get disgusted with them and impatient and unhappy, but you have confidence that they are going to do what is best for the United States of America. If not with this particular group of scoundrels, but with the next group perhaps. You believe that. You have confidence in this system that has prevailed for so many years. What happens when state legislatures announce that they are no longer going to obey the law of the land? Anarchy. It's around the corner. It would have been the fragmentation of all of us. And what I really particularly dislike is the fact that it was two senior elected members of the United States, Mr. Jefferson, the vice president. By the way, he condemns the Alien and Sedition Acts. The president perhaps was the one that signed them, but what do you think the role of the vice president is in an administration? To stand behind the president and say, no, don't do that. He's a part of the administration. And I don't blame John Adams for being angry with you, sir, for many years, because you were a disloyal, an incredibly disloyal vice president. He was also a disloyal American. He and Mr. Madison were being paid by the people of the United States to work within the system, and they chose to work outside of it. And they did it anonymously. I believe in standing for your own points of view and saying, this is my view, this is what I think we need to do. And if Mr. Madison and Mr. Jefferson had spoken publicly and said, this is what we think is going on, I would have respected them for their candor. Their lack of candor makes me worry. I once said, when things happen in darkness, mischief is afoot. When things happen in darkness, mischief is afoot.
I'm going to duck that provocation. I'd be happy to respond if you'd like. I don't think you want my response.
There you have it.
Well, let me just say this much. First of all, with the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, I've spoken of the double sovereign, that in our system the states are sovereign in some respects, and the national government is sovereign in some limited respects. And this isn't just my theory, Mr. Hamilton, it's the 10th Amendment of the Bill of Rights. Remember, the 10th Amendment, which was passed to honor the concern that Americans had about how strong the new central government was. The Bill of Rights came as a kind of second constitutional initiative to tell the American people that the Founding Fathers knew that it had been difficult for them to swallow this now strong central government, and here were some protections that would be put in place to make sure that that new government were not too strong. And Mr. Madison, my closest friend, is the author of the Bill of Rights, one of the most extraordinary documents in the history of mankind. And just for a moment, imagine your constitutional system without the Bill of Rights. But the 10th Amendment was put at the end of this list to assure the people of this country that this new government would not have runaway powers. And what it says is those powers not delegated to the national government belong instead to the states and to the people. In other words, a dual sovereignty is embedded into the very constitutional system which we ratified in 1787 through 1789. So this isn't a personal theory. So what happens when the national government does something palpably in violation of the Bill of Rights, the Alien and the Naturalization and the Sedition laws? Both houses of Congress dutifully pass this. The president dutifully signs it. The Supreme Court dutifully stands by and allows it to trample upon the Bill of Rights. Now the entire national government has gone beyond its own restraints. It has deliberately violated the First and other amendments. Nobody in the national government has remonstrated. Nobody in the national government has vetoed it. Nobody in the national government has said this is a destructive measure. And suddenly, it becomes an extra-constitutional law. It's a palpable violation of the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment. So then what? What do you do when your national government, and I'm not asking you this as a rhetorical question, what do you do when your national government exceeds the authority you granted to it when you ratified that instrument? If they can't do it with their separation of powers doctrine at the national level, then thanks to the 10th Amendment, our guarantee here in Virginia, we can say we won't accept that. You have gone beyond the powers we granted to you. If you can't self-patrol your extra constitutional actions at the national level, the 10th Amendment gives us the right to interpose ourselves at the state level. Madison wrote the Virginia resolutions, I wrote the Kentucky resolutions, and the Kentucky resolutions are a little stronger and more radical than the Virginia ones. But I said when the national government thus exceeds its authority, the only response are two. Three really. A state can secede, and I believe any state has a right at any time to secede. A state can protest by way of the Kentucky or Virginia resolutions, or the state can enter into a spirit of revolution. So you choose which one you prefer.
I think there's a fourth option, sir. It's called vote out the rascals, which is precisely what happened in the next election cycle.
So I will defend the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, and I will not allow you to suggest that they were somehow radical or unconstitutional. They are guaranteed by the 10th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And as long as you are being sanctimonious about the rule of law, let me tell this audience what you did in May of 1800. Under our Constitution, each state designs its own system to create electors for the Electoral College. Virginia had one system, New Hampshire a different one. Each state gets to choose any mechanism that it pleases to create those electors who sit at the Electoral College. New York's way of doing it, which had been in place for a number of years, was to let the legislature, both houses, elect the electors. That was the system. Nobody doubted that. So the contest in New York wasn't the presidential election in the fall. The contest was the state legislature elections in the spring. And Hamilton and Burr went after each other like two bull elk in this contest, because whatever happened in New York would probably decide the presidential election. And Burr outmaneuvered the Hamiltonians, and when the state legislature was created, the new representatives were elected in May, they turned out to be in my camp, and that meant that the electors would be Republican electors, all 12 of them, and that would probably install me as president in the fall. So that was the system. It's the democratic process. Everyone had agreed upon it in advance. In this case, the Hamiltonians lost and the Burrites won. Here's what Hamilton did. He wrote to the governor of the state of New York, John Jay, and he said, let's retroactively change the way we create the electors in the state of New York. He said it wouldn't be too good to be over-scrupulous about such things at a time like this. He wanted to void the election in the state of New York, to undermine the process that he himself was a part of. And I wouldn't have brought it up if he hadn't been sanctimoniously talking about the importance of the rule of law in American culture. John Jay, when he received that letter, was a high Federalist, and he did not want me to be the President of the United States. Jay, the governor, did not even deign to answer that letter, and on the back of it he wrote, "This is a political move that it would not be decorous for a man like myself to support." Defend that as the rule of law.
Why do I have to defend it, Mr. Jefferson? By the way, I was accused at our last debate of engaging in repeated ad hominem. There you go.
Well,
Ad hominem.
you were just talking about the rule of law.
And
Let's
I haven't
hear it.
even mentioned James Callender. All he wanted was to be postmaster of Richmond, Virginia. He didn't want much after he'd been released after the Alien and Sedition Acts.
But can you defend this action?
I believe there was a great deal at stake. No, I think it was a movement of, it was desperation, but I think I understood better than most people, having been the Inspector General of the Army. I understood better than most people what an incredibly poor President of the United States we had, and I understood what a reprehensible man Aaron Burr was, and I can't imagine why anyone would want to have Burr as their Vice President. Even Mr. Jefferson called him a crooked gun. He doesn't fire where he's supposed to, except when he's shooting at me. He's a misfiring man, and yet Mr. Jefferson, this high-minded twistificator, made a political bargain with him to get the electoral votes of New York so he could become president. And this is the same man who said, if I could go to heaven at the head of a political party or not at all, I would rather not go. John Adams, who at one time was one of his dearest friends, said he had a mind honeycombed with ambition. Mr. Jefferson wanted to be president so badly. He was willing to stoop to all manner of things, including engaging in the kind of journalistic practices that are reprehensible in any time or space. So, high-minded? No. Was I high-minded at that moment? No, I was desperate. Did I think anyone who would want Burr one heartbeat away from the presidency was in his right mind? Absolutely not.
So I'm taking that as a yes, you were willing to void the election in the state of New York.
Mr. Jefferson, we're both lawyers. We know that we can find ways to make virtually anything happen legally.
I leave it to the folks of Virginia to evaluate that one. Thank you very much. Mr. Alexander Hamilton.
Did a wonderful job and made history come alive.
Round two, I decided I'm not going to be aggressive, but I'm going to punch back.
You know, he was armed for bear, and he probably will the next time as well.
Become a member of WHRO right now at the $65 level, and you'll receive a special Director's DVD version of tonight's program. The Great Debate, Jefferson versus Hamilton, the Rematch Special Edition DVD features extras not included in tonight's broadcast. A question and answer session with the audience, a bonus behind-the-scene montage that takes you backstage with the actors and the crew, plus you'll find 2 features on the Roper Theater's rich history that takes you back to 1926. At the $75 level of support, you will receive a personally autographed copy of Bill Kristol's newest book, Thomas Jefferson versus Alexander Hamilton in Their Own Words. This beautifully bound book details more of the great debate between these 2 political geniuses through their own words, directly from their own writings. If you pledge at the $120 level tonight, we will be happy to send you a DVD combo pack that features both the special edition of tonight's program along with the first great debate between Jefferson and Hamilton. And for your gift to WHRO at the $250 level of support, you'll receive both DVDs, the autographed copy of Bill Kristol's book, and you'll get 2 tickets for a tour of Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home in beautiful Charlottesville, Virginia. Explore and grow with WHRO. These gifts are one way that we can say thank you for your support of your public television station for Eastern Virginia and Northeastern North Carolina. Thank you.
So, this debate has been really exciting for people. I'm thrilled that you guys didn't go to blows. That was a nice thing to see, because maybe back in the day that might have happened. So what else can we tell the viewer that they haven't seen, and maybe your experiences about this whole debate phenomenon?
Let me just say, first of all, that it's my pleasure to be here. I'm actually a Virginian. I live about 3.5 hours away from here,
right.
And I gladly and willingly come over here whenever I'm asked.
We really appreciate that.
I think WHRO is a quality station. Clay and I have done programs all over the country, and WHRO is the only station that has stood up and actually created DVDs that show what Jefferson and Hamilton thought, their differing views.
It's a good point. That's unique to this market. This is not a national program. This is made for the Hampton Roads market.
It's made for the Hampton Roads market, but these programs are going all over the country. You have performed a vital service, I think, for good American founding father education. And I can't thank you enough for your willingness to do this, Bert.
Well, and again, thank you for coming in. We know it was about a 3-hour drive for you to come here, so thank you, and your wife for being here. Thank you very much. We are going to go back and hear from the audience, hear from Clay and Bill, but we want you to become members. Again, the numbers are on your screen, 889-9476, or that toll-free 800-940-7170. Go online to WHRO.org. But become a member in WHRO. I tell you, the experience is so different from having this be that station that you occasionally turn on to making it an ownership situation where you are a part of this great organization. Become a member, especially if you've never done it before. What a better time. 889-9476. Talk to your friends, neighbors, and loved ones who are here manning phones, and tell them you want to become a part of this great public television station. We're going back. We thank you for being with us tonight, and we hope you become a member. Thanks.
Made history come alive.
Felt like you were sitting with those people.
I think they were both equally matched. It's hard to pick a winner between the two of them.
Who really won was Hamilton. And not because I'm a realist. I'm with Jefferson. I really love aspiration. I loved it.
I love them both.
With Alexander Hamilton.
It's America. Freedom!
I thought it was extraordinary. I have never heard so many opinions and bounce back and forth.
I have a greater appreciation of Hamilton.
I mean, I guess we all won the debate, right, by being here.
Round one, it was like he was rabbit punching the whole time.
Well, Clay knows Hamilton a lot better than he did in the first debate. He's done a lot of research between then and now.
Round two, I decided I'm not going to be aggressive, but I'm going to punch back.
You know, he was armed for bear, and he probably will the next time as well.
Round three, I hope we can just be at straight civility, just ideas alone.
I'm learning a lot about Jefferson, more than I knew the last time we were on stage together. So I think between the two of us, hopefully we'll kind of bring what's going on to a new level. I hope so.